Okay, now we're gonna go over 8.2, which is about special right triangles for 45, 45, and 90-degree triangles, okay? So the 45, 45, and 90-degree theorem says that if you're given isosceles right triangle, then the length of the hypotenuse will be the square root of 2 times the length of a side or leg, which is the formula that you have to remember right here, which is the hypotenuse equals the legs times the square root of 2. Now, one thing that you do have to know with isosceles right triangle, you have to know that isosceles right triangle, you can determine that a triangle is isosceles triangle through two ways. One, you can know that's isosceles right triangle through that you know that has 45, 45, 90-degree angles. Or two, you can, if you know that the two sides that makes the right angle is the same, then it will also be an isosceles right triangle. Now, however, these two go hand to hand each other. Basically, if you know one of them is true, then you know the other one must be true as well. So let me show you an example right here with this little demonstration, okay? Now, if I know, let me erase these. If I know that you have the angles 45, 45, and 90, then I know these two legs that makes the triangle, these two legs that makes the right angle must be the same degree, like the S and the S right here. The same thing goes the other way around as well. If I didn't know that these are 45 degrees, but I know that my two sides that makes this right angle right here is the same because they're both S's, then I can also, from this I can tell that these two angles right here must be 45 degrees. Okay. Now, this is the same thing you have to remember for isosceles triangles as well. If you guys remember, any isosceles triangle is basically when any isosceles triangles have the same base angle measurement, and once you know that they have the same base angle measurement, you also know that their two sides are congruent. Same thing the other way around for isosceles triangles. If you know that two sides are congruent, then these two base angles are the same. Now, these are just some key things that you have to remember, because sometimes your question will not give you a straight isosceles right triangle. You have to know how to figure out or how to prove it. Then you can use the theorem that we have to use here. Now, let's take this theorem and do a couple of questions. So looking at part A. So if I'm giving to you the 45 and 45, 90 triangle, I can just go ahead and straight use that formula I have. I'm going to write it down, which is that my hypotenuse, I'm just going to put H as a shortcut, will equals to the square root of 2 times my leg. Now, first thing, from previous, I know if it's 45, 45, 90-degree triangle, then I know the other part must be true, which is that the two sides that makes the right triangle will be the same. So, if this is 4 right here, then the other side that makes my right angle right here must also be 4. So from right off the bat, I know that my x here will be equaling to 4. Okay. Now, let's find my y. I know y is my hypotenuse because it is the side that's right across from my right angle. So this is my hypotenuse. So I know my h is my hypotenuse is y, and this is equaling to the square root of 2 times the measurement of my leg, which I know right here is 4. Now, when you multiply radicals, when your radical cannot be simplified anymore, meaning 2 is not a perfect square, you will just multiply it by putting the 4 at the front of your radical. If you cannot simplify the radical, you will just leave it as this, and this is our final answer for our y value. Okay, moving on. Now let's take a look at this one, okay? Now this one here, it's going to be a little bit, this one's a very confusing one, so I choose not to go over in class. But if you watch this video, let me explain it for you, okay? So we know from previously, from just the knowledge of isosceles triangle, we know isosceles triangles has to either have two angles that are the same or two sides that are the same. Once you know one of them is true, then the other one must be true. This means if I just look at this right now, the triangle right now, I know that these two triangles have the same angles right here, right? This means that they are isosceles triangle. So if they're isosceles triangle, it also means that this angle right here and this angle right here must be the same. So I'm going to label it, they are the same angle measurement. Now going back to the second criteria of my isosceles triangle, it says that if two sides makes a right angle are the same length, then it's isosceles right triangle, or the 45, 45, 90 degree triangle. So if these two sides that makes my right angle is the same length, which it is, then this means that this is isosceles right triangle, which makes this also, like I said, these go back and forth, 45, 45, 90 degree angles. So this is 90, this is 45, and this is 45. Remember, you always have to prove that it's a 45, 45, 90 degree angle before you can use your formula. Now, once we prove this, now we can use our formula to figure out my x and my y's. Now, I know my x equals the y because they are the same length that I proved. I proved them that they have the same length. Now, in order for me to find my length of my leg, I'm going to use my formula, which is hypotenuse equals the square root of 2 times my leg. I know my hypotenuse is 6, square root of 2 equals, now this equals to square root of 2 times my leg, which I'll just call the x for now because this is one of my leg. Okay, now we just have to solve. So to isolate my x, I divide square root of 2 on both sides. This cancels out on the right. This will give me x equals, well, on the right side, square root of 2 cancels out, give me my x 6. Now, once I know my x is 6, I know automatically through this previous part right here that my y here will also be equal to 6, and that solves my question. Now, let's go to question C. Okay, for question C though, this one you have to remember the triangle angle sum theorem. Okay, basically saying that all angles inside my triangle must be 180. So to figure out my x, all I have to do is I'm going to do 180 minus the angle I have right here, which is 90 degrees, minus the angle I have right here, which is 45 degrees. This will give me 45, meaning that my x here will be 45. And that figures out my x value. Well, the next thing is that I know this is a 45, 45, 90 degree angle, so I can use this to figure out what is my leg value, which is what is my y. So let me write down h is equal to the square root of 2 times my leg. Now, by looking at this picture, I know that my hypotenuse will be 16 because this is the side that's right across from my right angle. So I'll put 16 instead of my hypotenuse equals the square root of 2 times my leg. Or, to make things easier, let me just put y because y is my leg. Now, to isolate my y, I'll divide square root of 2 on both sides. This will give me y equals to 16 and the square root of 2. Now, you do have to learn how to rationalize your radicals, meaning you don't want your radicals at the bottom of your denominator. So you're going to do this by multiplying both the top and bottom by the square root of 2. And I can do this because the square root of 2 over the square root of 2 is just 1. I'm only doing this so I can change the form up a little bit. By changing the form I meant, if I go ahead and multiply the bottom by the square root of 2, if I do square root of 2 times square root of 2, that just becomes 2. Now I no longer have the radical at the bottom, and that's my goal. This is why I'm doing this. Now on the top, I have 16 and the square root of 2. Now, 16 divided by 2 gives me 8, and the radical 2, I bring it down. This means my y value here will be 8 and the square root of 2. Let's go ahead and do part D right here. So we know from the given that this is the 45, 45, 90 degree angle, and we're asked to find my x and my y's. Now, first of all, if it is a 45, 45, 90 degree angle, then I know its two legs have the same length. The two legs that makes my right angle will have the same length. So this means if this side right here is 7 and square root of 3, then this y here must also be 7 and the square root of 3. Now to find my x value or my hypotenuse, because I know this is a side that's right across from my right angle, to find my hypotenuse, I will just set up my equation as hypotenuse equal to the square root of 2 times my leg. I know my hypotenuse is x. I put square root of 2 times my leg value, which is 7, and the square root of 3. Now, if you remember, when we multiply radicals, if your radicals are to the same index, then you can just multiply the numbers inside. So you do 2 and 3, multiply together, that will give you 6, and you bring this outside number right here. So my answer for this question will just be 7 and the square root of 6. And since it can no longer be simplified, you will just leave this as your answer. Okay, next question. We have 2 more questions left. Now, on this one right here, we know that since the 2 sides that makes my right angle right here are the same length, we know automatically now that this angle right here is 45 and this angle right here is 45 degrees. Now, once we know it's a 45, 45, 90 degree triangle, we can now use our formula, okay? So we know my hypotenuse, or the x I'm trying to find, is equal to the square root of 2 times my leg. I know my hypotenuse is the x, so let me just replace it with x equals square root of 2. My leg length is 7 and the square root of 2. Now let's multiply them together. So this will be x equals 7 and the square root of 4. Now, the thing is that you know that the square root of 4 you can simplify because the square root of 4 is actually just 2. So this will be instead as 7 times 2, which will give us 14 as my answer. This is a very easy one. Now let's try one last one that I asked you guys to do in class individually, okay? Now this question is very similar to one of the previous questions. We're given 2 angles and we're missing one more. We do the same thing. We use the triangle sum theorem, which is that you use 180 minus 45 minus 90. 45 and 90, that'll give me my missing angle right here, which will be 45. So this right here will be 45 degrees. Now, once you prove that's a 45, 45, 90 angle, you can use this to find your missing leg right here. So let me set my formula, which is hypotenuse equal to square root of 2 times my leg. My hypotenuse, I know, is the side that's right across from my right angle, which is going to be a and the square root of 6 is equal to the square root of 2 times my leg, which is what I'm trying to find, so I write x. Now, in order to isolate my x, I'm going to go ahead and divide square root of 2 on both sides. This cancels out on the right side. And on the left side, if you guys remember all the way from algebra, same with multiplying radicals, when you divide by radicals, if you had the same index, then you just divide the numbers inside. So this becomes the square root of 6 divided by 2, which becomes square root of 3, and you bring the 8 down. And this means my x will equals 8 and the square root of 3. And that's all I have for this lesson. Please ask me if you have any questions.